Hi, my name is Michelle, and I am a parent of three adopted children. We adopted two kids from right away when they were born. One's a kinship adoption, one was a private adoption, a friend of a friend situation. And we raised them till they were about 8 or 9 years old when we decided to enter foster care. I wanted to parent, uh, build our family. We wanted to build our family a little bit more. My husband's a little bit older, and I had helped raise two stepkids, and they were adults, and so we wanted to build family, and we started with foster care. And we had a first several small short-term foster placements with a plan for foster to adoption. And the first long term foster child we had for about a year, um, really wasn't going to be didn't have terminate they weren't going to terminate parent rights, and wasn't available for adoption. We had a really great experience helping parent her. And while we were doing that, we of course met other foster families, became friends, and I we came in contact with our son that we eventually adopted. And that foster family wasn't going to work out. He was available. They had terminated parent rights. He had been TPR'd, and but it didn't work out. And we had about 30 seconds for our to decide whether or not to adopt or to foster parent him first. And it was a tough decision because we knew he was a pretty tough kid. I really, really liked, he had been on the soccer team with he was a year older than my youngest. And I was coaching soccer, and I knew him, and I was really excited, but I knew he was a tough kid. And so we started foster parenting, and it worked out pretty good in the beginning. He's extremely charming, very likable kid, very immediately um, calling us mom and dad, and I knew those were red flags because my husband and I had taken the time when we were trying to adopt earlier, years earlier, we'd taken the time to take parenting classes to understand the adoption process, to understand what happens. I was I am an occupational therapist, and eventually had become a special ed teacher. My husband had worked with at-risk youth, and we had really thought hard and studied hard to to, to adopt tough kids. And I knew that him calling us mom and dad right away were flags, but I didn't really understand what was really going on with him. Um, and we were right in the middle of transitioning out this other foster child to her home, and I was dealing with she had lived with us for a year. I was dealing with some feelings of loss around that, and but we were getting it through. And he was already in therapy, and we thought we had our village. And I didn't really understand what was going on at first. There was a lot of antagonism. I'll just call it that. He would antagonize and tease and joke a lot. He was in special ed, so with a specific learning disability, but there were factors, obviously emotional factors, that he was in counseling for. We were working on our own counseling, just trying to manage all of it together. And he was extremely kind, and nice, and then he would go into some rages, and we were struggling. And within a year and a half, I knew attachment was probably a big factor. And we had gone down to Colorado to look at some brain mapping and see what we could do. Where were the missing pieces? What could we do better on? And more and more, my personality was knuckle down, be specific, be consistent, be all these things, and it would just make things worse. And it was worse. It was highs and lows. We would often say there was a high and a low, and he would go through these. We would have good days, and then we would just fall apart. He would come home, he would lie, he would come home with other people's things, and I was constantly getting told these are normal behaviors. This is how kids are, and you just need to parent like this. And um, the more that we did that, the tougher and more chaotic he became, the more rages, the long rages. And he was never really violent with us right away at the beginning. He would break things in his room. He was purposely destroy his items in his room. He would self-harm. He would pick at his skin. We'd have to remove things from his room so that he couldn't dig into his skin with even the smallest little paper clips. Um, hide and hoard food, which were things we understood, but um, it was starting, pest control and all those things was really starting. We were really having to isolate more and more. And I really felt like we had to control more and more. And all that did was create a situation where we all of a sudden our village got smaller and smaller, and we wouldn't go do things because we might have an outburst here, or he might take something there. And all this time my other two kids were kind of being victimized by him, joking and being antagonistic and poking fun all the time at them. And I feel great shame over it, because I was very much saying, be kind to him. He's had a really horrible 7 years before he got to us. It was awful. And be kind and be open, and let's give grace where we need to give it. And I would my husband and I would just continue to just nail down what can we do better. Anyway, as he got older, the rages and the behaviors got more aggressive. um, One weekend when we were headed down to watch a football game, he was using the seatbelt to choke. He would try to open the car door, and he was choking my other son. And then we fell apart. I was in the middle of the summer. We'd gone to a wedding, and I had begged and pleaded for us to get a neuropsychological eval, and it still hadn't come in. It was months. It was months and months. And I'm like, we're falling apart. I could feel it, that we were falling apart. And then we fell apart. My husband lost his temper. Um, he slapped our son, and we became part of the DFS system. And it was awful, and it was embarrassing, and the great shame of it all. And it wasn't how we parented. And I remember the police officer it was a one-off. He was trying to reassure us, but the DFS worker was young, and for the next 6 months I was blamed for everything, and shamed by the other foster family. So he was traumatized by going to another foster placement, and they would sit in the meetings and, why didn't you, and how come, and it was awful. um it still is. It's heartbreaking until he nearly totally melted down on them, had a tantrum in their car, and they had to call an ambulance while they were on the side of the highway. And then they understood. But before all that happened, I was told I shouldn't be involved. I was told by our attorney to be quiet. I was taken at one point. Um, the caseworker has said, "Stop calling, stop doing things." The guardian ad litem wouldn't take my calls. I was really trying very hard to just be very specific and not be that mom of what I needed. And at one point, they were trying to court order a medication, and I had a problem with the medication because there wasn't a protocol at the facility where he ended up going for managing it. The particular medication can cause problems with blood sugar, and they didn't have a protocol for it. And I, being someone in the healthcare industry, I was concerned about that, and so I had the power to deny medication. That's the only thing I could do. And I just said, look, I don't want him on that med right now. And then they took me to court for court ordered medication. And finally, the judge listened. I mean, finally, the judge looked straight at me and asked me what I needed. And that's when things turned around for us. Um, that whole that whole time when he was at the residential facility, we knew that that wasn't going to really help him. That was our opportunity to become understanding. That's when we got the diagnosis of RAD. And all of the things we had studied about RAD and been told about RAD were things that didn't really happen. Like he wasn't, it wasn't on that side of the spectrum, right? It was just this persistent antagonism and meanness about him privately. And so we pulled money out of my husband's retirement. We spent that time educating ourselves on that diagnosis. We went across the country to California, to Florida, went to different conferences. I learned about what a glass child was, which I didn't know that term, which was where my other two children just started being very quiet and not adding to the drama and stuffing down what was happening to them because they didn't want to upset me. They didn't want to make my life harder. And I found some gumption. I found a voice. I found a village of people like-minded people who knew what we were going through. I was able to educate my own mother and my dad and the rest of my family on what was really going on, because before there was sometimes questioning, like, why are you guys not here, and why don't you just let the kids go out here, and I would say no, because I knew what was going on. So I felt better. We felt better afterwards, and we thought we had our plan. And he got home, and we spent the summer working together, reorienting each other, coming back together as family, working on ourselves, working with therapists. And that Christmas, he was angry because I wouldn't let him listen to music in the car. He had headphones and he had forgotten them. And I just said, no, we're not going to listen to that, because it was music that had a lot of swearing and I didn't like it. And I know that music was one of the things that helped him, but I didn't want that blasting through the car. And so we were going to go shopping for Christmas. And I said, nope, we're not going to go shopping. I'm not having a fight with you right now, because then, all the things of him jumping out of cars, and he got so angry that I was on the phone with we had a safety plan at that point, and we were on the phone trying to help him calm down, and he took I don't even a shovel, and he took off the mirrors of the car and hit the car with the shovel, and then he went inside, and I had called the police, and he took a fire poker and a knife, and he carved out his face out of the family portrait, and he destroyed the tree, the Christmas tree, the television with the fire poker while I hid in a room with my son. My daughter was in the other room until the police got there. And that's when he started with the court system. And he never came home after that. In 2020, he was in we found a place that understood Rad a little bit more. And it was pretty far away. And they were much more understanding. And again, we were in the state I am in, the court system and the Department of Family Services, probation, all that's in one unit, right? So I was with the same people, but this time around, I knew what I was talking about. I knew what questions to ask. I knew what we needed because I didn't know what we needed before. And he it was dumb 2020 and trying to get him care and help my other children heal, because at that point my other two kids were in therapy trying to heal. And he did okay, but he got people fired. He got one of the workers to get him a cell phone and start texting girls and things like that. That got one of the one of their people fired, because that's how charming he could be. He could just get his way any way that he could. Anyway, my husband and I, after he finished up his treatment there, knew that he couldn't really come back right away into the house. I used to describe that as, you wouldn't, when you're in healthcare, there's a leveling system. So basically, we couldn't send him. It's like sending someone with a stroke home without therapy. We have a fairly violent kid now that I couldn't bring him in with the other two kids there. I didn't think that was safe. So we split, basically. We split up into two homes, and my husband would be with one house with the other two kids, and I would be at the other place with him, and then we would swap, and we would tap and tag out. By this point, we lived in a fishbowl. There were cameras everywhere in our home to prevent violence. He was still on probation, and that was the one thing that really helped, honestly, because if I made the rules, or if Brett, my husband, made the rules, he would just balk at them, and not do them. But he would honor what probation had said. And so if they gave a curfew, he would honor that. If he couldn't have something, it was always probation. And that way we could really work on our relationship. But when my youngest was no longer the person he could antagonize, I became the person that he could antagonize. And I would go through, he would rage at me 5 hours of him saying vile, awful things to me. And then I would call my husband, and I would tap out and tag out and go. So anyway, he once probation got out, he couldn't maintain, and we wasn't willing was it safe for him to come home. We found a situation where he could be in an apartment on his own. And then he got kicked out of that. And by that time, he was 18 and wanted to go back to his bio family. So that's my story. There's a lot that I don't say, but I think what's important is that the biggest thing for me was the shame and the guilt. I was suicidal for a long time. I wanted to die because I couldn't fix it. And I feel bad for my other kids. And I love him. And he's not okay. Just this last February, he overdosed. He's okay, but not okay. He calls me sometimes on Instagram, and I just tell him I love him. And he asks for pictures of all the fun things that we did. And I send him with all the cute things that we did. And I try to focus on just doing what I can and still parenting from a distance. I don't, I'm not sorry that we adopted him, but I do understand how some people just fail, because I did. Anyway, hold on. My little puppy opened the door. She can hear me crying. Anyway, that's my story. I hope you can find your village.
I'm Katie Rose. I'm the founder and president of Attached Families Inc. I am a mother of two beautiful boys that I adopted from foster care who, due to their own demons, issues, they spent 10 years um, being violent in some way. Most people talk about domestic violence and they don't include the fact that there is child to parent violence. And it happens every day in America to thousands and thousands of families who are ashamed or blamed or isolating themselves because they don't know what else to do. Most families who reach out for help and ask for help are somehow hurt in that process. They become blamed or threatened that they'll lose their other children simply for speaking out and looking for help. It is my hope that while connecting and partnering and collaborating with these amazing other organizations, that we can bring awareness to society that this is happening and something needs to change. It is no longer okay to say that the systems are broken and go on with our day. We must do something to fix it.